start please. And I'll just give a quick pause, and then we'll start the conversation. So, Chris, as per usual, well, not usual. I'm sitting at home, but as per usual, we'll start with some of the insights you had on the Noah Bible plan from this last week.
You know, I appreciate that. It's so interesting. It feels like he kind of, it feels like it's very familiar territory, right?
Hmm.
This is one of those stories that sticks with you from the earliest age, or at least it did for me. I think it does for a lot of people. And it's almost like there aren't a lot of surprises in it, but what I pulled from it is this is a story about two things, really. Maybe three, but two for sure. This is a story about God's promise, and it's a story about Noah's obedience. And those two things are related, but they're not contingent on each other. Does that make sense? So start at the beginning of the story, and we'll just recap. God is a just God, and earth is corrupted. People are just, well, it reminds me of even today.
Right.
Just corrupt generation.
Yep.
Right? You know, everything's like evil is everywhere, and people are allowing for it everywhere.
Right.
And in this instance, then God says, you know what? I got to clean this place up. And he speaks to Noah. And elsewhere later in the Bible, we hear that God doesn't do anything except that he tells somebody first.
Mm.
Okay? So here's God telling Noah, and many times God tells people way in advance.
Right.
Right? If you think about Isaiah, and this is a little footnote, but Isaiah was writing about Jesus 700 years roughly before Jesus appeared. 700 years. That's like only God can do that, right? So here's God speaking to Noah and saying, okay, essentially, start building a boat now because many years from now, I'm going to flood the earth.
Yeah.
Right? And Noah's like, okay, because he trusts God and obeys. And so God's promise to him is through you, I'm going to save everything. I'm going to save essentially anything with the breath of life. I'm going to save it through you and your family. And, you know, we know whether it's apocryphal or the reality of the story is Noah's neighbors mocked him. We don't know what that would have been like, but we just know that his neighbors were like, you're crazy.
Right.
And Noah withstood it, I assume by the grace of God, and continues to obey. This is what, to me, puts Noah in that really rarefied class of amazing people of faith.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get derailed from somebody's comment about, you believe what? You heard what? Yeah, well, whatever. And I can get knocked off the horse pretty easy sometimes. Right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
Noah obeyed. And so God proceeded with the plan. And because Noah obeyed, here we are.
Right.
Right. And this is no slippery slope to me. Some people are like, well, how could that work? And, you know, Noah's family is the beginning of all families and whatever. I think so, probably. God didn't tell me otherwise.
You know,
right? And he wiped out the whole earth.
I'm always caught, I don't know, a little surprised when people get caught up in these nitty gritty. They're not necessarily nitty gritty, but they're small details, right? It's
They
like
are.
God just sent a flood to the world, to the earth,
Yep.
and saved humanity through an ark, and the flood was there for 40 days, 40 nights. Had somebody like Do you really think he can't, make things work
Right,
for that? I don't know.
right.
I get it though. As like when as a younger person, I certainly needed like all the details. And when you're going through some more of those questioning phases, right? I understand.
Yeah,
But to let that be a stopper, like, well, if you're gonna believe that the flood came, yeah,
right.
I think he can bring about people.
And here's the reality too. If you think about it, there are other historical accounts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, for example,
Mhm.
that talk about this worldwide flood. So, okay, you're kind of stuck for the truth of, hey, that happened. So if that happened, how do you not follow the rest of the narrative to the end of truth? For me, it's as I got older, for me, it was like, you know what? Like you were saying, Zach, it's completely believable just because of who God is.
Right.
Completely credible. I remember too, this story almost always dredges up memories of my childhood.
Mm.
Yeah, I grew up in the 70s as a little kid. And in the 70s, there were shows that were about mysteries and stuff. Like there was a show called In Search of. And In Search of was a 30-minute story. I guess there's 100 of these probably episodes. In Search of was some of the mysteries of the universe, the Bermuda Triangle, Area 51, all these things. And Noah's Ark was one of these.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a constant like search for Noah's Ark theme, right? And people were like, man, if we find the Ark, it'll verify everything. And I bought into that kind of as a 7, 8, 9 year old. I was like, yeah, I want to see Noah's Ark. That's cool. Where did it land? And they think they found it and then they didn't. And then they think and then this and then that. And it was all just furthering the mystery. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. Today, 50 years old, and I'm thinking, so what?
Right.
Like it landed somewhere, but the whole story isn't validated by the finding of the ark.
Right.
The whole story
It'd be
actually is
cool.
validated as a foreshadowing or even an archetype of Jesus and his salvation.
Yeah, there was something on day 4, I think, and I think
Yeah.
Angie commented on it in the Bible plan too. But there was it was about when they're going in the ark and God closes the door. And man, there were just two. Sorry, I've got to actually look at it here real quick, otherwise I'm going to forget.
Yeah.
Um, but so the two thoughts, the two emphasis, and I want to go back to your thought about hearing people call you crazy later,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think that's really valuable. But I
Mm-hmm.
think that there were two thoughts. The first was that once the door was closed, there wasn't a chance anymore. There wasn't there was
Right.
no more going back for those people, right? And I don't know
Right.
how much Noah did that, tried to do it. I imagine he tried, but there's no story about it, right? So
Right.
so who knows? But once the doors close, that's it. And I think in the devotional, there was just some talk about, for us right now, the doors are not closed for people,
That's right.
right? So eventually the doors will be closed. So
That's
make
right.
the most of the opportunity while the doors are open, right? Take that opportunity to share Christ's love with people while they still have a chance, right? While they can still, you know, um, hear it, right? Before they die, before you die, whatever.
And
And then
look at how many allegories,
yeah,
right? Look at like the virgins with
yeah,
the
exactly,
oil and
right.
the bridegroom is really the same story.
Same story. The
It's the same
same
story.
same purpose, right?
Yep.
And God tries to urge that in us, right?
Yep.
Regularly, with through many different stories, right? Hey guys, you can do something right now. Don't wait. Don't wait.
There
Especially when it
will
comes
be
to
a
telling people
time.
about Jesus, right?
Yep.
The second thing that I loved about that day, though, and this is more of just a small thing, is it's pretty clear that God closed the door, and so
Yes.
I think I think about that mostly in the merciful sense to Noah, that Noah didn't have to lock these people out. Um, and I don't want to read too much into that because it's a little bit more vague, and I don't think there's tons of value to it. But it does seem like God rescued Noah from this, having to close the door on the people, which would just be such a merciful thing to do. So those were the two things that stuck out to me about that day. Um, and it's weird because I know to tell people about Jesus right now. Like that's something I know, but just hearing and reading the story again and that reminder of this door was closed, these people did drown, right? Just reminds me, I guess, of the not just the urgency, but the finality of it, right?
Yeah,
When it's over, it's over.
yeah.
So take advantage of the time that we have. So that was big for me. If you have any thoughts on that, or if you want to jump back to people questioning Noah over the years that he's building this ark, that would be a good conversation, I think, too.
Yeah, I think, man, I think both are really great points that we could
I
sort
know.
of expound.
Take whichever way you want, man.
Um, I like your thinking that it's a mercy that God closed the door.
Yeah.
It makes me think of any time that God himself performed an action on behalf of his people. Like right when Moses died, God buried him,
Yeah.
right? So there are like people that we would put, like I said earlier, rarefied company, people who obeyed God in some, what we might say, pretty profound or extreme ways. God looks after them, right?
Right.
Yeah. And I think God recognizes how fragile we are in spirit and emotions and all that stuff. How hard would it have been? I never thought about this till you said it. How hard would it have been, even for like, if God said, okay, Noah, close the door,
Right.
and Noah could have been very like, but there's people out there. Give me another chance,
Hmm. I mean,
right?
can you imagine? And I mean, one, the difficulty of that, but two, and I think we forget this just pretty easily. Like God, I just use this phrase for myself a lot, right? God likes me. He doesn't just love me, right?
Exactly.
And it's a tough thing, tough thing I think sometimes to remind myself. But he doesn't just obligatorily love me because he has to. He likes me. He wants a relationship with me, and that can be hard for me to imagine because I know how much of a doofus and a screw up I am. But
Man, me too. Yeah.
he likes all of us, right? And so seeing in these stories this personal touch that God has towards people, right? This, hey, I'll close the door. This, I'm gonna bury Moses. These types of personal relationship stories, they're just fantastic because we're more than just cogs and pawns to accomplish what he wants, right? He likes us. I don't
I mean, look, I think about a couple things, but it just in line with that, I think about Enoch, who walked so closely with God that he never had to die.
Yeah, that's crazy.
God just picked him up one day, right? Hey, let's just go for one more walk. You
Right.
just stick with me. And the same, right? And the same thing happened to Elijah,
Yep.
right? God didn't he didn't have to suffer death. He just, here, I'm going to send a chariot. Everyone's going to have their jaw on the floor and you're going to get in and go.
Yep.
I mean, it shows me what kind of, like, that's a spiritual experience that happens even in their natural selves. So we all talk about frequently, we talk about, well, you're spirit and flesh.
Right.
These guys somehow, God just said, okay, now we're just gonna utilize this spiritual stuff you've been practicing all along. Here we go.
Well, it's another one, and I'm gonna tie this in to a second to the people question because there's just a connection there. But um, that's another place where you can get caught up, and there's just not really a need to get caught up, right?
Yeah.
God can do it. One of the interest as you're talking, and I'm thinking about the personal relationship and just that level of trust and that understanding as I'm thinking about building an ark. Do you remember how many years he's building the ark?
I don't.
Okay,
I don't.
years, right? I wanted
But
to
it
look
was,
at it, but I just forgot.
something makes me think it was something significant like 7 or something.
That's
But
what I'm thinking. Yeah,
yeah, but
that's
I don't want to
sure.
misspeak. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was a long time.
But if you imagine spending all that time building that ark, and I don't know how much you start putting things together early, and you start ordering, I don't know, ordering the wood or however the process is, but people are going to be making fun of you and asking you questions, and just kind of, I don't know, got to be smirking at you the whole time. And what gives you that strength, I think, to not just be like, all right, you guys, you're right. This is dumb. I'm not going to do this. Even if you're pretty confident you're right, like there's times where I've been confident that I'm right and I've still given in to peer pressure. Um, and and then I think it comes back to a degree that personal relationship. Well, if you're confident in in God, right? If you're confident that he's told you something, if you're confident that he's actually there, that he cares about you, that he's right, that he's powerful,
Mhm.
then all these voices they just don't mean nearly as much, right? I think
Yeah,
sometimes when I think about how significant these voices are, I think about them not in terms of or in kind of a silo, right? If you take away God's voice, these voices are really powerful. But
can
maybe
be.
if his voice is present, they're just not as significant. I don't know. We're at 14. We're at just about 15 minutes. What are your final thoughts, Chris?
Final thought. I appreciate this. The enemy sows doubt, and what's miraculous to me is how many voices there must have been
Mm,
of Noah's neighbors to sow the same seed of doubt that totally got Eve,
yeah,
right? The
yeah,
enemy, if we remember back, the enemy says to Eve, did God really say? And that's all it took,
yep.
you know, you'll surely not die. And she's like, oh, well, maybe I won't, right?
Mm.
How many voices was it that Noah was like, well, God said this, this, and this, and it's going to rain and it's going to flood and we're going to need this boat. And did God really say? Did not derail him.
That's a really good point.
So salvation comes through and doubt is defeated through Noah.
Hmm.
And think about that. This is amazing to me. This is the first time we get like a macro view of any story in the Bible. Creation takes 3 chapters. Noah takes 3 chapters, right? So it's like, hey guys, pay attention. This is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And by chapter 9 of Genesis, at the beginning of chapter 9, actually, really the last verse of chapter 8, creation is remade,
Yeah.
right? So we have 8 chapters, original creation, remade.
Hmm.
8 chapters. We got zillions of chapters to follow. Incredible.
It is, man. It's neat. I appreciate you saying that. I appreciate that. That is just fantastic.